Story number 1. Friday nights were always the best growing up. My friends and I were kids in the 90s, and our Friday nights always consisted of TGIF, all the top shows that kids watched at that age. We always watched Step by Step, Family Matters, and Hanging with Mr. Cooper, among others. My house had a large bonus room down in the basement that we would all camp out in, have snacks, watch TV, play video games until the sun came up Saturday morning. We were 13 years old the night this happened. It was 3 a.m., the dead of night, and my friend said he heard a scratching sound on one of the basement windows. The weather was very windy and rainy throughout the night, so at first we thought that it was a branch. I paused the game we were playing and heard the scraping sound once more. I shut off the TV and killed all the lights in the room, and there was a clear as day reflection of a man peering in the basement window. We could see his reflection in the TV screen. My friends and I locked eyes in this moment of terror, didn't make a single sound. I figured if we pretended not to see this man, that maybe he would just leave. I turned the TV back on and asked my friends if they wanted some more popcorn. I made sure I spoke loud enough for this mystery man to hear me and think we were not aware of his presence. I casually walked up the stairs and then booked it to my parents' room. I yelled for my parents to come downstairs and that there was a man outside our basement window. My dad grabbed his handgun and sprinted down the stairs, quietly opened the front door to check the perimeter. He didn't want to let this would-be intruder know. He knew that he was outside. My dad checked our whole house and the surrounding area, found no one. He did find something all the more terrifying, though. There were zip ties and a large hunting knife about 6 feet from the basement window. The man must have been spooked when he heard my dad sprinting down the stairs. My friends and I were shaken up for the next few days. I hope this man never comes back or harms anyone else in the future. We decided to never spend the night in the basement from here on out. Story number 2. This winter we've had more snow than in years past. I live in Chicago and it has been so cold all season long. I'm a 15-year-old female and live with my single mom in a home just outside of the big city. Our home is a split level and has a really run-down old basement. I try and avoid the basement at all costs. It reminds me of the basement from Home Alone that Kevin tries so desperately to avoid. Our kitchen has a door that leads down to a basement. We have a lock on that door because our basement has a door that leads to the back alley in the street behind our house. We have 2 deadbolt locks on the door that leads to the street. Our washer and dryers are also located in the basement, so it can be very scary going down there alone. There are several windows in the basement that we have curtains above for some form of privacy. This past Friday afternoon, after I returned home from school, I needed to start a load of laundry. It was around 5 p.m. and almost dark outside. My mom gets off work at 7 p.m., so I was home alone for a couple of hours at least. I opened the door to the basement and proceeded down the stairs. Each stair creaks louder than the one before. I was halfway down the staircase and heard a small noise right near the washing machine. I swear to God it sounded like someone had knocked something off a shelf and whispered, "Oh shit." My heart stopped. I turned around and bolted up the stairs and locked the door to the kitchen. I know what I heard. Someone has to be in our basement hiding. I called 911 and they told me to go to a room and lock myself in until they arrived. I locked myself in my mom's room, which is at the top of the stairs. Her room is the only one with a lock on the door. I was in her room for maybe 60 seconds when I heard quiet footsteps heading up the stairs. This can't be the police, because they would have announced themselves first off. I am so scared right now. My mouth is dry, and I can't quiet my breathing to save my life. A knock resonates through the thin wooden door. I know you're in there, little girl. Ha ha ha. You shouldn't have called the police like that. I know for a fact they won't be here for another 10 minutes. I have a police scanner. Open the door, it'll be more fun that way. I have no words to say or muster in this moment. I literally saw moments of my life flash through my mind in a flashing light sequence. This would be it for me. I would either be kidnapped or much worse fate. I yelled, "I have a knife," knowing full well that I didn't. The man did not respond. A loud crash fell upon my ears. He had an axe and was breaking down the door. I closed my eyes and prayed for a miracle. All is silent now. The room goes black. I wake up sometime later to a police officer putting a blanket around me in an ambulance. Apparently, right after this intruder hit the bathroom door, the police arrived and shot him. He was only feet away from me when he fell from the gunshot. I passed out from the shock of it. I know this seems like a movie and so far from the truth, but unless you went through it, shut your mouth and don't judge me. Story number 3. I've never considered myself a believer in the supernatural, but in recent months I've been having some strange experiences. They are difficult for me to explain. Honestly, I fear I may be going insane. Perhaps I should start at the beginning. I was in a relationship with a beautiful young woman named Vanessa. We were very close and I truly thought she would be the one. Then 6 years ago, she was killed in a drunk driving incident. Her death devastated me to the core. For the next couple of years, I completely shut down emotionally, especially around the opposite sex. Eventually, I met another young woman named Jennifer. We seemed to hit it off well and she helped me climb out of my self-imposed shell and open up again. In time, I fell in love with her and I wanted to take the next step, but I was still haunted by the loss of Vanessa and I feared I may lose Jennifer the same way. The one night, I had a dream about Vanessa. In the dream, we were sitting on my living room couch just shooting the breeze. It all seemed so real. "I've missed you so much," I said. "I know. I miss you too," she replied. "Life just hasn't been the same without you. I'm still finding it so difficult to move on." "Have you found another woman?" she asked. "I'm not sure I want to talk about it." "You have found someone, haven't you?" She didn't sound upset, just curious. I sighed in defeat. "Yeah, I guess you could say I have. There's no question I've fallen for her, but what? I don't wish to betray your memory," I said while barely holding back tears. She smiled and held my hand. "My time in that world is over. Although I cherished our time together, I don't want you to remain in grief and agony forever, not even for me. She will make you happy. Don't be afraid to start over." I opened my mouth to say more, but that's when I woke up. I spent the next day or so pondering what I had gone over with myself and my subconscious. Perhaps it was time to start over. I confessed my feelings to Jennifer, and much to my delight, she reciprocated. Eventually we married and I had fathered twin boys. That's when things began to get weird. It happened one night when my twins were 2. I was in the living room playing with them after a long day at work, while Jennifer, who is an excellent cook, was in the kitchen fixing our favorite dish. It started out normal enough like any other night. Then I could have sworn I heard a voice say, "Alarm, malfunction." I looked up at the sound of the voice. "Did you say something, honey?" "No." Huh? I could have sworn I heard something. I didn't hear anything. I shrugged it off and went back to entertaining my sons. A few minutes passed and I heard it again. Alarm, malfunction. There it goes again. What was that, sweetie? You didn't hear it? It said alarm malfunction. I haven't heard a thing, dear. An awkward silence ensued. Then that voice came again. Alarm malfunction. For reasons I can't explain, I somehow felt compelled to obey this odd voice. I got up from the living room and walked towards our burglar alarm in the hallway. Lo and behold, the machine was indeed malfunctioning. Fortunately, I'm a decent mechanic, and I was able to fix it in a few minutes. Then I had a pleasant dinner with Jennifer and the boys. That night, we woke up to the sound of an alarm blaring. Someone had broken into the house. Whoever it was, they were not deterred by the burglar alarm because we could hear them roaming around downstairs. My wife and sons hid in our bathroom while I pulled my 12-gauge shotgun out of the closet. I opened the bedroom door and I saw a man dressed in black ascend the staircase. I pumped the shotgun. He stopped dead in his tracks. He remained frozen in place until the police arrived to arrest him. Jennifer and the twins would spend the rest of the night in a nearby hotel, but I stayed at home to gather my thoughts. My mind wandered back to that strange voice. Who was it? Where was it coming from? But I was less worried about that than the fact that I was hearing voices. After all, only crazy people hear voices, right? Then again, it did save my life as well as my family. But that's just a coincidence. 2 months later, I had forgotten about the whole thing. I was scheduled for a job interview with a large technical firm. Was very excited about it because this new job would help me to better support my family. I was driving to the company's main building downtown, humming my favorite songs to myself to pass the time. Then the voice returned. Don't go in there. It sounded like a forceful whisper. I turned around and looked in the back seat to see if anyone had somehow managed to sneak into my car. But no one was there. I arrived at the building and get my briefcase out of my car. As I approached the building, the voice spoke again. Don't go in there. I stopped in the middle of the parking lot. As before, I felt compelled to listen to what the voice was telling me, but this time, I tried to ignore it. Soon as I took one step closer, don't go in. The voice was louder and more insistent. It sounded more clear than it had before. It was definitely female. I stood there for several minutes, finally throwing my hands up in frustration. I turned around and walked away from the building and headed towards a bar 2 blocks away. I felt I needed a drink and badly. Before I could take a sip from my scotch, I heard a very loud explosion. I rushed out of the bar and saw something truly horrifying. The top floor of the building where my interview had been scheduled was on fire. It was burning furiously and people were running in the streets screaming. Jennifer embraced me tightly when I returned home, relieved that I wasn't hurt. But as for me, my mind was all over the place. That night I couldn't sleep. I was thinking about the strange, disembodied female voice that I had heard today and that one night 2 months ago. I was beginning to fear that I was slowly losing my sanity. Suddenly, it occurred to me exactly who it sounded like. Vanessa. But it can't be. She's been dead for 6 years. No, I'm going crazy. That's the only explanation. Feeling a need to clear my head, I got up out of bed and went out for a late-night drive. I hadn't been driving for 5 minutes when the voice reappeared. Danger ahead. I ignored it and pressed forward. I was approaching an intersection. There didn't appear to be any other cars on the street that night. Danger ahead. I began driving faster. Danger ahead. I entered the intersection, and I heard a loud crash. Next thing I knew, my car was flipping over, and all I could hear was the sound of broken glass and twisted metal. My next memory was of some strange, empty void, although my vision was blurry, and I couldn't make out what it was. The voice spoke once more, but in a calmer and reassuring tone. It's not your time yet. Your family needs you. Farewell. I love you. A bright flash of light, and I woke up in a hospital bed, surrounded by my friends and family. If you're having a hard time believing this story, I don't blame you. I understand that these accounts sound like the rambling of a crazy person, but I just can't ignore everything that happened. Remember the dream I mentioned earlier? Was it really just a dream or a message from beyond? Am I going insane, or is my dead girlfriend watching over me, far beyond the grave? Story number 1. It was 2006 and I was a student attending the American College Dance Festival, which was held at Boston University that year. I was 20 and I went to a small college in another state. There were about 10 of us who went on the trip. My college flew us out to Boston, but didn't have funds for hotel accommodation, so we all stayed with anyone we knew in Boston. One of my best friends from high school was studying at another college in Boston, so I crashed at her apartment for the festival. Each day we would start with some dance classes early in the morning on the BU campus. I took the subway to get from my friend's place to campus, and I had to take the very first train in the morning to get on there on time. The nearest subway stop was one of those very small and simple ones, where there's just a platform with stairs leading up to the street on either side. No employees or kiosks. I had little experience in navigating large cities and subway travel, and I was nervous to get around this way, especially since the early hour, and the small stop meant I was often there all by myself. So when I saw a worker in MTA, Massachusetts Transportation Authority vest, sweeping snow off the steps one morning, I was immediately relieved. Boy, was I wrong. I went down the stairs and sat on a bench on the platform alone. Shortly afterwards, the worker came and stood uncomfortably close to me with his broom. He kept looking at me out of the corner of his eye. I thought his behavior was creepy, and I noted to myself that he obviously had not had time to finish clearing the snow off the steps. I was getting really tense when a couple, who were being loud and appeared drunk from the night before, came down and waited on the opposite bench. The worker didn't move, kept side-eyeing me. The train came and was already very full. I grabbed one of the last remaining seats, and the MTA worker boarded the same car and stood near me. I could see his reflection in the window of the subway car as he stared at me for the whole ride. He didn't seem to be aware I could see him staring. When I got off at my stop, he got off too and started following me. Luckily, my dancer's legs propelled me through a big crowd of people, and I lost him as he followed me off the train. I had the deepest, creepy feeling about the whole thing. Still gives me the willies over a decade later. Story number 2. It's been a few days since this took place, and I'm still very creeped out. Nothing really happened, but it feels like a close call type of situation that could have gone very badly. This is my first and hopefully last time I post on this subreddit. I'm currently taking a first-year astronomy class in university for an easy credit. When we were discussing the planets, a professor mentioned that Jupiter and Saturn are highly visible in the southwest sky in the evening, and that the first star you see is actually Jupiter, which is pretty neat. I decided to go out that evening by the lake and sure enough, was able to see Jupiter. Now, the light pollution in this town is very bad, but down by the waterfront the light is somewhat minimized. There are also no street lamps in the immediate vicinity, which makes stargazing very decent. I began to go down by the waterfront at dusk, around 7 p.m., and staying a few hours to observe and learn the constellations using a stargazing app. I did this for almost 2 weeks straight, weather permitting. My professor also mentioned to the class that binoculars are better for stargazing than a telescope for beginners, so I bought a pair of binoculars online. A few nights ago, I decided to go much later, around 9:20 p.m. with my new binoculars for the first time. I wanted to try to take some pictures of Jupiter with my phone looking through the binoculars. I usually cut across a tiny parking lot to get down to the waterfront. It should be noted that the parking lot is beside a small historical tower, which has a little hill behind it. As I'm about to cross the dark parking lot, no lamps or light sources, I hear a, "Hey," and I stop. I hear nothing else, and as the silence stretches on, start to get mildly creeped out. I turn around and start to walk back home, but as I'm nearing the street, I think to myself, you know what? No, I want to test these binoculars out. I ignore my gut feeling, but instead of crossing the parking lot, decide to go around the tower and sit on the little hill behind it, because I don't know who is by the water, and I don't want to risk it. The tower is closer to the street, which means there's a few street lamps nearby, but the tower blocks the light out enough. Huge mistake. As I'm fiddling with the binoculars and trying to take pictures, I notice two figures making their way up the hill in my direction. Now, that in itself is not a big deal, but I started to get the weird feeling once more. I just have this really strong gut reaction that something isn't right, and that I need to leave now. Again, I brush it aside and tell myself that I'm just being paranoid and stupid, and to just focus on what I'm doing. They're probably just out for a stroll. It is a nice night. When I put the binoculars down again, I notice that they're closer and still walking straight towards me. My eyes have adjusted to the dark by now, and I can see that they are two men. "Good evening," I say, trying to sound cheery and to ward off my worry, but I get no response. What's weird is that I know that they're within earshot, and a normal person would say hello back, right? One guy stops walking and looks out onto the street. The other guy keeps walking towards me and stops. Both of the men are backlit, and it's dark out, so I can't see their features very well. One of them seems to have a beard. Both are wearing large black coats. "Hello?" I ask very loudly. The guy with the beard is about 20 feet away from me, but I can't tell if he's looking at me or just in my general direction. I know that he's definitely within earshot at this point. He takes a few slow steps toward me and stops, 15 feet away. My mind is racing, trying to remember any self-defense techniques I learned in high school gym, but coming up empty. "Hello?" I ask again and again, get no verbal response. Instead, he takes a few more steps and pauses, 10 feet away. I just have alarm bells going off in my head at this point. The feeling of "get out of here now" has completely gripped me. It suddenly dawns on me that there's nobody around. It's just me and these two men behind the tower in the dark. I need to leave in a way that won't make them react badly. I pull out my phone, trying to keep an eye on the guy, hoping that he can't see my screen as I'm shaking so much that I'm struggling to open the phone app. I eventually manage to open it after what feels like an eternity. Pretend to dial a number, because this is a hand-me-down phone that I use to take pictures and video. There's no SIM card. My actual phone is home. "Hi, Mom," I say loudly, trying to steady my voice. "I'm looking at the stars. Yeah, they're really pretty." As soon as I say those words, they instantly start walking away. Part of me wanted to try to take a picture of them to possibly report them. I mean, what if this has happened before? But my gut instinct says to get away from the area. Since the tower is a circle, they could have easily just been walking around the tower to intercept me on the other side, so I didn't risk it. I didn't even try to pack up my binoculars properly. Just grabbed my stuff, loudly saying things like, "Yep, I'm on my way home," pretending to be on my phone, only hanging up once I was in a brightly lit area and around other people. Nobody followed me, thankfully. I'm still a little shaken up, which is admittedly a little silly since it's already been a few days, and I should be over it now because it was such a minor incident. I've had a few nightmares in which the situation is drastically a different ending. I won't let this event scare me away from stargazing, but I'll make sure to bring something to defend myself with, tell my housemates where I am, what time I should be back, and when to come up and check on me the next time I go out. Story number 3. This all happened a few months ago. Me and my 4 friends, we're all 13, were sleeping over at my friend's house on a Saturday night. We all got to his house around 4. Eventually we decided to go to the McDonald's that was about 30 minutes away. After arriving at McDonald's, we ate our food, went to shop for about 15 minutes, and left. It was around 5:30 when we decided to go to the welfare that was near the shop. Now, in the UK, anyone who lives here will know that it gets pitch black at 5:30 p.m. in the winter, so it was very dark outside. To get to the welfare, it was either a 20-minute walk around the housing estate we were by, or cut through a forest which would take about 10 to 15 minutes. We all decided to cut through the forest. We were all joking around, pushing each other to try and scare each other. Around 5 minutes before we got to the welfare, we all heard a twig snap to the left of us. We started laughing at my friend letting out a slight scream. We thought it was a small rodent like a squirrel or something. We were about to keep on walking when we saw our friend just frozen, staring into the woods. We all told him to hurry the fuck up, but he just wouldn't move. 2 of us decided to go towards my friend to see what he was staring at. Looking back now, I really wish we walked around the housing estate, because what I saw will never ever leave me, and I hope no one will ever have to experience this. I saw a man. He stood there staring at us, not moving. My friend took out his phone and turned on the torch and aimed it at him, and what I saw was just terrifying. The man had a knife clenched in his teeth, with the knife going through the side of his cheek. Blood dropped down his chin and on his clothing and on the ground. We all lost our shit screaming and running, trying not to trip on the mud or the bottles on the ground. When we reached the end of the forest, we were all red-faced and shaking. We all walked back to our friend's house, just reflecting on what just happened. We went on to have our sleepover and had a good time, except for the fact that we all kept thinking of what happened. We never told anyone about this, and I hope that I never meet that man in the woods again. Story number 4. For weeks, someone has been watching. Someone in a black truck. I honestly haven't thought much of it until everything started coming to light and started making sense. A few weeks ago, I noticed, after I drove to my friend's house, across the street from her house directly is a popular bank. There, a black truck with its headlights on bright would sit. It would stay and wait. I remembered thinking, why in the world do you have your brights on? The brights would illuminate the driveway to her home. It was almost blinding when I would get out of my car and walk to her porch. It annoyed me how bright it was, even across a highway. It started happening more frequently, and I didn't think much of it. I thought maybe it was a different vehicle, or it was someone waiting on another person. I then began to get paranoid. My friends started noticing it too. It would happen anywhere between 7 and 10 p.m. Didn't matter what day it was. The days would change, but it only came if it was just her alone or if it was just us two. A few days ago, this person got more bold. My friend dragged a mattress into the living room so that I could sleep on it, and her boyfriend could sleep on the couch with her. We all stayed there together that night. The sun went down and one set of her window blinds was pulled up a little. If you were standing outside with the height of her home, you could see us laying down sleeping. I was getting sleepy but not completely tired enough to close my eyes, so I got on my phone. If you look out the window, you can see a flashing sign to a gas station. I laid there and noticed the flashing as it illuminated her room ever so slightly. Then it disappeared. I thought how odd it was when I began noticing it. Then the flashing started about 5 minutes later, and I felt at ease again. A few minutes later, I heard crunching sounds, like someone was stepping on twigs and leaves outside. I started to tense up and locked my phone so I could focus on what I was hearing. It stopped, and so did the flashing light. All I could hear were my friends lightly snoring and my own breathing. My pulse was racing. I looked at the window and saw nothing but a black shadow in front of where the light would be. The shadow then turned and the light flashed in through the window again. I sat up and slowly walked to the window to lower the blinds. A truck started up shortly after. I was then panicking inside. I walked to the bathroom at the end of the house and opened the curtains to see a truck with its brights on drive away from the bank parking lot. This person crossed a highway on foot just to look inside her home. They waited for probably 10 minutes outside her living room window and watched. The next morning I brought this up to her and she had a look of pure horror. She described how she noticed the truck at the bank and how a friend of hers down the road had an incident where a black truck parked across from her house when she was coming home and eventually pulled into her driveway when they saw her vehicle parked, knew she was inside. They beat on her friend's door for a few minutes, would leave and come back just to beat on the door again. They left when her friend's boyfriend arrived. All I know is, be aware of your surroundings. Always notice the little things. And to this shadow, let's never meet again. Story number 1. My name is Kenny and I'm 32 years old, and this story happened around 2 years ago. I'd been single for about 3 years, so I thought it was time I got into the dating scene. I spent time looking through Match.com, eHarmony, and a few other dating websites. I actually came across a prison dating site. You could find male or female inmates that are looking for a relationship, kind of like a pen pal at first. I matched with a girl named Layla, who is 26 years old and serving a 5-year prison sentence for a few DUIs and some parole violations. Honestly, I didn't think anything would come from it, but she matched me back along with a message about herself, and we had a lot in common. Fast forward about 7 months of letters, talking on the phone, and a few visits. She would be getting released. The thing was, she didn't have any family or friends and nowhere to stay. It was a bit sudden, but I said she could move in with me and she accepted. The first week of her staying with me went fine. However, on a night I kept noticing she would get out of bed and not return for quite a few hours, sometimes not at all. It didn't wake me up fully, but it was definitely enough to notice she was moving around. I tried to talk to Layla about it and asked if she had trouble sleeping or sleepwalked, anything like that. She would always say no and brush it aside. This carried on for another week, till I decided to look up online about sleepwalking and that kind of thing. I read one article to set up a camera to see what happens in the night and what is causing them to wake up. I thought it was worth a try and set up my laptop to record footage as we slept. I didn't tell Layla about this because she got defensive and kind of aggressive every time I mentioned it. As usual, I heard Layla get up in the night. The next morning while she was downstairs, I looked at the footage. I saw her get up, walk around the bedroom aimlessly. This went on for about 3 nights, until the 4th night when she sat up in bed and turned and looked at me. This isn't creepy. The creepy thing was she stared at me straight for an hour and 35 minutes. I was creeped out but not yet alarmed. The next few nights were the same. Layla would wake up and just stare at me for long periods of time. One night, however, scared the hell out of me. I saw Layla walk downstairs after waking up, which is the first time she had done that, but when she came back, she was holding a large kitchen knife. My blood ran cold while watching this. She then walked beside the bed and stood next to me, and held the knife close to my face. After standing there for almost 2 hours, she placed the knife under my pillow. I went to see if it was still there, and it wasn't. After checking the footage, it shows shortly after she went back to sleep. She must have removed the knife that morning after waking up, which scared me and still scares me to think. How did she know it was there, and even how it got there? The next night I struggled to sleep. In fact, I didn't sleep because I could hear Layla walking around in the night. At one point I heard her standing right next to me for what felt like an eternity. I did my best not to open my eyes and pretend I was asleep. I'm not sure what time it was, but in the early hours of the morning, I fell asleep and woke up around 7 a.m. Layla wasn't in the bedroom, but I assumed she was downstairs making coffee. So, like every morning, I checked the footage. Like the night before, Layla went downstairs, grabbed a large kitchen knife and stood right over me. This time she lifted the knife up looking as if she was about to ram it into my throat. In the footage it looked like she was breathing very heavily, like she was about to have a panic attack. She lifted the knife up 4 times looking as if to commit murder. Thankfully she didn't. What's even scarier was she walked over to the laptop, directly into the camera lens, and shut it off. It frightens me so much to think that maybe she knew what she was doing the whole time, even with the camera rolling. That was the last time I saw Layla on footage or in person. She wasn't in the house and she was gone. Her clothes were still in my house, so I called the police and filed a missing persons report. Like I said, this story happened 2 years ago, and to this day, me nor the police have any idea where she went. The only thing she took with her was that large kitchen knife. Story number 2. My name is Jasper, and I'm 22 years old. This story happened to me 4 months ago. I lived in the Netherlands, and I had been single for about 1.5 years, and wanted to try and meet someone. I decided to download the app Tinder. I was swiping left on most girls I came across, and swiping right on a few that I thought were interesting based on their information. I swiped right on a girl called Louisa, who was 20 years old. She studied at the University of Amsterdam, played field hockey and enjoys camping. She was pretty cute and seemed cool. About 2 hours later I got a match with Louisa, and a message saying hello with a smiley face. Happy and a little surprised, I replied with hello, how are you? We got to know each other for a little bit, and after about 2 days of talking we arranged to meet up. She wanted to meet me in Rotterdam, near the Erasmus Bridge. I live in a town called Delft, so a train ride to Rotterdam wasn't too far at all. I think it was a Thursday night we arranged to meet up, and the plan was to grab dinner, have a walk around the dock, and then stay the night in a hotel, in separate rooms. I arrived in Rotterdam at 4:30 p.m. and got an Uber to the Erasmus Bridge, where we planned to meet. I messaged Louisa telling her I had arrived. She replied saying, cool, come around to the back of the hotel. Weird, but okay, I thought. I took a short walk around the nearby hotel, and at this point it started to rain. I saw Louisa and was happy to see her, but that good feeling didn't last as she got out of a car and walked towards me. The thing was, there was another guy in the car, in the driver's seat, and another car behind that one with tinted windows. They didn't look too friendly, but I thought maybe she just got a lift or something with her friends, and would quickly move on from it. However, Louisa then told me that we were going to a party with her friends, assuming she meant the people in the cars. I said, oh, I thought we were going to grab dinner. She turned to look at the cars and then looked back at me. Oh, yeah, we are. but I thought we would go to the party with my friends first. I had no idea who these people were inside the car, or how many there were for that matter. I was getting bad vibes from this whole situation, and even from Louisa. Something just wasn't right. She then said to at least meet her friends. I was skeptical, but I thought I could at least see what they were like. But all she did was walk me over to the first car and say, "That's Seb in the driver's seat." And she then listed out a few other names of people who were in the other car, mainly girls. I said hello to Seb. He didn't even respond to me. After that, Louisa said, "Shall we go to the party?" There was no way I was going to get into either one of those cars. I told Louisa no and that I was uncomfortable. At that point, Louisa looked irritated and she continued to try and persuade me to get in and go with her. I declined each time. She then looked at the second car and I guess made some kind of signal to them, because 4 large men got out of the car and quickly approached me. I immediately ran off back towards the front of the hotel near the bridge. After walking for a little bit, I went on Uber to try and get a ride back to the train station. Looking back now, I should have just called the police. I'm not really sure why I didn't. Anyway, I caught an Uber to come and pick me up, and I'm not kidding, it said Seb is on their way. After looking at the picture, it was the same Seb who had just tried to attack me with his gang. I quickly canceled it and jogged to the train station. It wasn't too far and I was very sure my adrenaline could get me there. Thankfully, I managed to get to my train and back home safely. As I was so focused on getting home, I never checked my Tinder. When I did, I saw that Louisa had messaged me. It said, "You should have just gotten the fucking car." I blocked and reported her. I knew if I did get in one of those cars, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't get out unharmed, if at all. I deleted my Tinder account after this incident. Story number 3. My name is Jessica. I'm 22 and this story happened 6 months ago. I frequently use Tinder, mainly to just talk with new people. I've gone on a few dates as well, although nothing came of it. I matched with a guy named Martin, who was 25 years old. We had been talking for about 4 days. We decided to meet up to go see a movie, as he suggested. It was about 7 p.m. when he picked me up outside a nearby restaurant. I didn't want him to know my home address just yet. We were driving towards the movie theater and just making small talk. At some point during our polite conversation, we drove past where the theater was. I asked him, "Isn't the theater that way?" "Theater? We're going to my place to watch a movie," he said. When he suggested to see a movie, I assumed he meant in the theater. A little skeptical, but I was still fine to go and watch a DVD with him, as so far everything seemed okay, and there weren't any red flags. We arrive at his house. Nothing special, just an average suburban home. We ended up watching the movie The Hills Have Eyes, while eating some Ben & Jerry's ice cream. Surprisingly, the date was going quite well to this point. Up until about halfway through the movie, I glanced at Martin and saw him looking at the TV, but like he wasn't concentrating. It was like he was daydreaming. I brushed it off. There was a gory part of the movie and it had been pretty silent, almost awkward for a little while. So I said, "God, can you imagine how much that must hurt?" I looked at Martin waiting for his response, and like before, he was just staring at the TV with a blank expression. I said I needed to use the bathroom and headed upstairs. Martin still didn't give me a single response. While I was upstairs, I did a little snooping around. There were 2 bedrooms. One looked to be a child's room, which confused me a little bit as Martin never mentioned that he had any siblings. Another room was an adult's room. It did not look like a 25-year-old man's bedroom, that's for sure. After snooping for a little bit longer, I looked at some photos that were on a nightstand in the hallway. It was a man and a woman with their daughter, and there weren't any of Martin. At that point, I got a very sick feeling that this wasn't even Martin's house, and Martin wasn't who he said he was. I planned on leaving as soon as I could. I was going to say I wasn't feeling well and needed to leave. However, when I returned downstairs, he wasn't on the couch. I actually couldn't see him anywhere, and also the DVD player and TV had been switched off, so it was just dark downstairs. "Martin?" I softly said out loud. I had no idea where he was. I saw this as my chance, and as quietly as I could snuck out through the front door. I turned around to take another look at the house, and in one of the upstairs rooms was Martin, standing in the dark, staring at me, with that empty expression. Had he been near me that whole time? Did he follow me upstairs? When I had this thought, it made my blood run cold. I ran down the street as fast as I could and got one of my friends to pick me up and give me a lift home. It's obvious he had broken into that house and was staying there. The next day is when the really strange part happened. I got a message from Martin saying, "I enjoyed our date. I hope we can do it again sometime soon," with a smiley face. It's like he had no recollection of what just happened, like he's two different people or something. I quickly blocked his account. I had no idea who Martin really is, or what he was doing in that house. The whole evening was weird as hell and one of the strangest things I've ever experienced. Story number 1. On Memorial Day of this year, I started working at one of the 2 gas stations in my small New Hampshire town, which is about 20 miles outside of our state capital. My town is basically the last line of civilization for an hour if you're traveling on the highway, so we get a lot of traffic. We also have a lot of regulars. We have people we know by name and people who we may not know the names of, but we recognize them, and the transaction will go a lot quicker if I just ask, "Do you want your cigarettes today?" Or "Which scratch ticket are you thinking about getting?" Most of these regulars are very kind to us. One even threatened to beat a guy who came in and tried to grab my coworker's hair when his card was declined. The person involved in this story was supposed to be one of those nice people. He was a guy whose name I never knew. He mostly came in during 3rd shift, and I usually saw him when I was about to leave. For the sake of the story, we'll call him Matty. He was always very pleasant and would always strike up a conversation with whoever was checking him out. The one I remember most vividly was us talking about all the reboots and sequels Hollywood keeps churning out. I want to work my way into the film industry someday and become either a writer or a director, and we were talking about how I could just start putting an end to the sequel fatigue. Last night I was cashing out my drawer after 3rd shift. We had both been gone for 3 days and were trying to catch each other up on what had happened over that time. Suddenly the 3rd shift guy brings up this open murder case. A woman from a town 30 minutes up the highway had gone missing, and then had been found dead in a washing machine that had been crudely dumped into a pond. He then brings up the fact that Matty was a prime suspect in the case. Matty was a bit of a druggie, to put it lightly, and had some shady connections. Eventually there was a rumor that he was into some fucked up stuff on the dark web and had some very brutal connections through there. I knew Matty had a drug issue, as he had told all of our staff about his issue and his rehab experiences. One of the 3rd shift guys, which is a friend, had also been put through the ringer by the cops, as he had gone out with the victim on a date only 2 nights before her disappearance. He wasn't ruled a suspect after a lot of questioning and looking through evidence. Matty evidently told the other 3rd shift worker that he was going out of town for a little while, a few nights back. I don't know if that was partly true or not, as it was passed on to me by a 2nd shift worker who likes to gossip about everything she can. If it is true, I would definitely think he had something to do with it. When my dad told me I'd meet some whacked individuals working this job, I believed him. I think this just cements that statement even more. Story number 2. My first semester in an out-of-state college had just ended, and I was on my way home for my brother's wedding. I'm about an hour away from my current residence with a little over 3 hours left of my trip. Everything is going great and I'm cruising with the traffic. It was a notably busy day for that particular stretch of interstate. As I said, all is well until I checked my mirror. There was a truck a little farther back from the side of my car in the lane next to me. I can see his headlights in my passenger side mirror. I look up because even though it's in the middle of the afternoon and very sunny, this guy's flashing his lights at me. I try to brush it off and assume he just wants to get into my lane, so I try moving. He stays behind me the whole time, not letting any other cars between us. He keeps flashing his lights at me and I look up at him. He waves and honks. This was a red flag, but I took it the wrong way. I'm like, oh shit, I wonder if he's signaling me to pull over. I hope nothing's wrong with my car. The only reason I think this is because a week before, I was leaving and I had gotten a hole in my tire and had it patched. I was worried that the patch had fallen out and that my tire was going flat as I traveled at 60 miles an hour. I'm freaking out about my car and plan to pull off at the next exit. Fortunately, it comes up quickly and there's a gas station with some customers visible from the exit ramp. I head there and pull up at a gas pump, and of course the trucker follows me off the interstate and into the same parking lot, but he parked in a designated truck zone only. I get out just before he parks and walk around my car, doing a quick inspection. I see him start to get out of his truck and I decide to buy gas, even though I filled up before I left. As I swipe my card to pay for the gas, the truck driver had reached my car. Lucky for me, since I was already pretty freaked out by him following me off the exit, I had my phone in my hand with 911 already dialed, so all I had to do was hit the call button. I left my driver door open and stayed between that and the gas hose. The first thing this guy says to me is, "Well, aren't you pretty?" I'm screaming in my head now, imagining all the possible scenarios for an emergency escape. He looked to be in his late 30s or early 40s, and about 170 pounds. Me? I'm 18, 125 pounds, without much muscle or fat anywhere. I wouldn't have been able to fight back much. Anyway, I tell him thank you. He offers to buy my gas and I decline, saying my parents gave me money. I was actually worried that he would expect something in return if I had taken his offer. He asked me questions like, where am I from? Where am I going? Something went off in my head that just said, lie, lie, lie. And so I did. Didn't tell him what college I really went to, where I was really headed and what I was doing. Nothing. My gas was done pumping after 1 minute, a whole $12. And with that I told him goodbye, jumped in my car and got the hell out of there. I kept an eye on him as he left, making sure he didn't follow me any longer, and he didn't. I never saw him again. I don't know what he wanted with me that day, whether it was just to tell me how attractive I was, or if he had something much worse planned. I really regret not reporting him to the police. Since this incident, I've always been leery of truck drivers. Story number 3. A little over 1 year ago, I had a job working overnight at a gas station close to my house. I'm a woman and was 31 at the time. I know. To some it seems unsafe for a woman to work graveyard shift by herself. However, it was a slow store and the sheriff's office was about 20 feet across from it. I really didn't think I would have that many problems. There would be about 30 customers in an 8-hour shift, and that was on a busier night. It was about 3:30 in the morning. I went outside to sweep the parking lot and to check the trash. It was time for a cigarette and I had one headphone in, kind of jamming out. Across the road in the parking lot of the sheriff's office, I saw a figure with his back to me. He was swaying back and forth while looking down. Honestly, it looked like he was enjoying a much-needed pee. Against the sheriff's office, though? Yeah, the building closed at 4 p.m. and didn't open again until 6 the next morning. But why? By the back of his ripped white t-shirt, I remembered that he had come in about 4 hours earlier. He was a total creep, and I could already tell he had a good buzz going. I didn't say anything. I just took my eyes off him and tried not to draw attention to myself. It was working until a car pulled in. I was still outside as they pulled up. I saw him look at the car and then at me, and back and forth again. As the customer was leaving, I walked her outside. I still had half a smoke burning, and had left my dustpan outside with a squeegee. We both heard him start to swear angrily, and seemingly engage in an argument with himself. She looked across the road and told me to be careful. I made an awkward joke about him being the one who should be more afraid of me, or something like that. The man was still there but closer to the road, now facing the parking lot of my store. Whatever he's yelling was completely unintelligible. He was obviously very drunk and could barely stand up straight, still swaying in the wind. I didn't engage him, but I didn't take my eyes off him this time. I was just slowly walking back into the store. Something about his face really bothered me. It had a darkness to it, but his eyes looked wild. My experience during graveyard jobs has been that the crazy-eyed ones are the worst ones. I didn't like it at all and wanted no part of this. I still had almost 3 hours to go and 2 before any other employees got there. Instantly, I went to the computer and typed up a temporarily closed sign, just in case he wanted trouble. I was coming around the counter on my way to the doors when I saw that he'd walked across the road to my side now. I literally just barely got the second door locked when he stumbled into our very small parking lot. My hand mimed the hand signal for cut across my neck, basically saying, "Nope, sorry, you can't come in here, we're closed." I shook my head back and forth too, hoping to further discourage him. He started walking away but screamed something at me while he was walking. I don't mean he was grumpy and shouted at me or yelled that I was an asshole or anything. I mean like he was at an enraged volume and was violently throwing his hands everywhere. Definitely know I'm in the wrong shift on the wrong job. I got really creeped out. I called the police. It's a good thing too, because the minute I hung up with them, here he comes again up to the door. He starts pulling and banging on the door. He backs up and runs into it, trying to ram it. Not that it would have done any good. I made the mistake of telling him that I'd called the cops and his ass was about to be grass. I say I made the mistake of telling him because once I said that, he took off. The police never found him. They drove around the road and surrounding neighborhoods for over an hour, but found no one. He was on foot, so I don't know where he could have gone. He didn't harm me, and with them not finding him, I didn't fill out a police report or anything. I was safe behind thick glass doors that were locked for the rest of my shift. It just sucked. Maybe if I didn't warn him ahead of time, I wouldn't have had to spend the last 3 months of my job constantly looking over my shoulder. I'll never know what the right choice was. I'm just glad I don't work there anymore. Story number 4. Back in 2000 or 2001, I was driving by myself from visiting my mom in Colorado, back to Arizona. I was driving a station wagon and had a desk my mom had given me that was my grandfather's. I've always been scared driving at night, that there's someone in my back seat that is going to get me. This might be because of too many scary movies, or because my mom's paranoia rubbed off on me. I was in the army and drove back and forth a lot to visit her. She would get mad at me for sleeping at rest stops or gas stations, and tell me someone was going to kidnap me and kill me, but I just didn't want to be bothered with the hassle and expense of a motel most of the time. I digress. So I'm driving in an empty stretch of highway late at night with no other cars around, This red truck comes up behind me, flashing his lights and honking his horn. I was thinking to myself that there was something wrong with my car, or maybe there was something wrong with the desk in the hatchback, because why else would he be so insistent on me pulling over? So I pull over. I was in my mid-20s and still a bit naive, and get out of my car. As I'm getting out of my car, he's directly behind me, and still flashing his lights and honking his horn. I got to about the middle of the car when it hit me. Why is he still honking at me when I'm out of my car? That's odd. Then he gets out of his truck. That's when I knew something just wasn't right. I jumped back in my car and sped off. The next exit was 45 miles or so away, and he followed me the entire time. I take the first exit to a crowded gas station with a laundromat next to it. There was an ambulance parked at the laundromat with its lights flashing, and I was next to it. I figured if there was an ambulance, then eventually a police officer would come. The man stayed in his truck in the gas station parking lot, watching me the entire time. I was so terrified. I did not want to get out of my car, and I felt like an idiot if I would have just told someone what happened. I waited an hour and he finally left. After he left, I waited a little longer before continuing my drive back to Arizona. I was paranoid and watchful for any red trucks the entire time. Fast forward 5 or 6 years. I'm watching Unsolved Mysteries or some similar type of crime show with my husband. And what story pops up? One about a man on that exact stretch of highway with a red truck that used to use those exact tactics to get a few women to pull over and murdered them. I'm really glad my gut told me something was wrong and to get back in my car and drive. Thank you guys for watching and listening. Please be sure to like, comment, share this video, and subscribe for further content. Be sure to email me your story ideas to thesinfulsavant@gmail.com. My email address is in the description box below. Until we meet again, stay sinful.